heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
From New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, a breakdown of Trump's VC pick, JD Vance, and his ties to Silicon Valley.
Huawei tries to beat U.S. curbs with a $1.4 billion chip R&D center in China. We discuss.
And exclusive Bloomberg reporting on Salesforce as the company cuts more of its workforce. First, let's check in on those markets at the moment, Ed, because we are barreling towards yet another record high on the S&P 500. Look, small caps doing a lot of the heavy lifting today as well. Retail sales come in solid. So even though it's not good enough to put off any sort of rate cut come September, we are still seeing some resilience in the U.S. consumer. We're up 0.6% over the last 2 days on the S&P 500. And even though we see a little bit of tech money coming off the table when it comes to Nvidia and others that have led the charge, more broadly, we are managing to push on to new record highs. But what are you looking at in terms of the micro data?
Our top story is former President Trump picking JD Vance, the senator, as his running mate, his pick for VP on the Republican ticket. We talked a lot about the Trump trade in the last 24 hours. Trump Media and Technology Group, the parent of Truth Social, is the most direct example of that. So this is a 2-day chart. We jumped 30% or so Monday, biggest jump since March, and we're giving some of it back Tuesday. There's no negative sentiment per se, but I flag it because Truth Social, in the first instance, Caro, is how Trump communicated that JD Vance was his pick.
Yeah, all about communication at the moment. StockTwits is one of the main stocks we keep an eye on. Let's go to the communication on the ground from our very own Joe Matthews standing by. And look, there is a lot to be said about the prominence of the role of JD Vance in Silicon Valley, in venture capital. What are you making of it on the ground?
Well, it's pretty interesting here. Obviously, a venture capitalist first known to many of our viewers and listeners here on Bloomberg, but he's also become a much louder voice when it comes to economic policy, when it comes to government spending, when it comes to crypto. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how he gets into Donald Trump's head here, potentially, because Donald Trump is not known for taking a lot of advice, and in this case, from a running mate. We saw these two together in the convention hall last night, and it was really about Donald Trump. JD Vance was at his side, smiling, waving, a celebration here in Milwaukee. But we have to remember, this is Donald Trump's convention. This is Donald Trump's...
Tara, I'm going to jump in because I think, Joe, I'm sorry to jump in. I think we lost your mic for a second there. But you raised a really interesting point, which is JD Vance has some very established views. For example, in the context of antitrust, where the conservative movement might be a little bit more split. Tell me about what it was like, though. You mentioned that all the focus was on Trump. Broadly, how did the party react to JD Vance versus some of the other names that have been touted?
Very well received. Look, that's going to be the deal, though, in a place hosting the Republican National Convention. Just spoke with Senator Bill Hagerty a short time ago, a Republican from Tennessee, who is very pro-crypto, but also very old-line Republican. He thinks it's a great choice. We've spoken with a number of officials here in Milwaukee who seem to be embracing this idea. I have to admit, most people were surprised to not be surprised. We've been talking about JD Vance on a short list here for weeks and weeks, and a lot of folks thought that Donald Trump might move in a different direction here. So it's an interesting and potentially disciplined move, but it tells us a lot about the future of the Republican Party. JD Vance is 39 years old and will be the heir apparent of the MAGA movement.
Bloomberg's Joe Matthew on the ground in Milwaukee. Thank you. Now, JD Vance spoke with Fox yesterday and talked about China.
I think what President Trump has promised to do is go in there, negotiate with the Russians and Ukrainians, bring this thing to a rapid close so that America can focus on the real issue, which is China. That's the biggest threat to our country, and we're completely distracted from it.
Both presidential candidates want to be seen as tough on China. Trump promised to hike tariff on China across the board if re-elected, and President Biden has boosted levies on Chinese electric vehicles. Joining us now is former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman, who also served as an Air Force intelligence officer. He's the founder of security firm Riggleman Information and Intelligence Group. Good morning to you, Mr. Riggleman. Let's just start with your reaction to JD Vance as Trump's pick as running mate and as potential vice president.
Well, it's funny. You were right. I was listening to you. It wasn't that much of a surprise to me. But I do believe this is very, very good, I would say, for the Democrats right now. I think his views on women, I think women voters are really going to carry this. So I think what they're going to do, they're going to attack JD Vance on multiple policy situations where he's flipped. They're going to attack him on what he said about Trump before. But I think what this really does for the Democrats is I think they're actually going to look at his issues on women. And I think it actually helps the Democratic ticket. I wasn't surprised, but I did think he might go another route, maybe a Nikki Haley route or a female vice president. But I think with JD Vance, I actually think it helps the Democrats based on what he said about women's issues and things of that nature.
You, an author yourself, you co-authored a book with Hunter Walker titled The Breach, which was published in October 22, all about January the 6th, Denver. You're also someone who feels that you were jettisoned from your own party for having officiated a same-sex marriage. So you've got an interesting relationship with the Republicans and put that out to our audience. But I do want to make sort of use of your expertise when it comes to cyber, to intelligence, to ultimately the risks that we heard coming from JD Vance about China, and whether you think that is something to be standing upon, whether that is something that you agree with as a key concern, and whether it will be tackled by the Republicans.
Regardless of J.D. Vance's views, say on January 6th as an election denier or what he does, the fact is China is a bipartisan support to look at China as a threat that they are. And, we talked about, stealing IP. We've talked about things like that with China. When you're talking about their AI development or they're talking about their technical development, I think we have to be very careful about the regulatory structure here in America when we're talking about AI development, tech development as far as China is concerned. I think actually, JD and the Dems, both sides really have some valid concerns about China. I just wrote an op-ed that I'm trying to get in about Chinese drones and Americans that use them, and actually law enforcement agencies that use them, and how they can be used as collection sources. So I do think right now, I was on the China task force in Congress. I do believe that China is the one bipartisan issue where everybody can gel together. And regardless of their past views or things like that, I think that the specific China issue is something we really have to worry about.
Congressman, one interesting point that our correspondent raised on the ground in Milwaukee is how much President Trump will or will not listen to his vice president pick. One policy area, for example, is big tech and antitrust. This is Bloomberg Technology after all. And Mr. Vance's position has been quite clear. He thinks that big tech should be broken up, that there is too much power, and he's aligned with the FTC. Other parts of the conservative movement want to see shrunk regulators and shrunk agencies. How do you think that will play out?
I don't actually think it's going to be one of the bigger issues when we're going into the election. I think afterwards, if the Trump administration is to win, I think it's going to be actually a bit of a war on antitrust with big tech. I've had my own issues with big tech, especially algorithmically and what they do in that environment. My company actually looks at some of this. We're looking at social media platforms and disinformation and how to use AI and graph neural networks to track those. So I do believe right now when you're talking about antitrust and tech, I think that is going to be one of the biggest things that we talk about after the election on how we either regulate, if we break them up, or if we look at some kind of algorithmic solutions, or we're looking at some other ways to see what's happening with big tech and how they're actually manipulating information. But I don't know if the antitrust stuff is going to go a long way, but I do think there is going to be a reckoning when it comes to how algorithms are used, how people are targeted, and what disinformation and things look like on big tech platforms. So that's really my opinion on it. It's a very complex topic, as you both know, but I do believe that that's probably going to be one of the lesser things they talk about during the campaign. But after whoever wins, I think there is going to be a reckoning with big tech on how we actually look at what they're doing on those platforms.
Denver, you've brought us a lot of complexity, Congressman, more broadly, to your views of what might hinder or propose and be a positive force for JD Vance. But as a founder yourself, does it make you positive that he's someone who understands venture capital and investing?
Actually, he doesn't make me confident at all. When you think about where he's come from, what he's done, yes, he's 39. He wrote a book. And I am a founder. I am looking at venture capital, right? I do have investors. JD Vance in the business side doesn't make me confident at all. I really don't think he knows what he's talking about in most respects. So I hate to be that blunt. But again, I think you're going to look at the staff around whatever president is elected. That's the people that actually do the policy making. I think JD Vance is there specifically to get votes, maybe in rural areas. Maybe they did polling. I don't think he's there for any of his business or technical expertise. I think he's simply there because he's presenting a vision of what MAGA policies look like in the future. And I don't think it really has to do with his business acumen at all. And sorry if I'm blunt about it, but that's how I feel about it.
Denver, we like blunt. We appreciate you, of course, Denver Riggleman, founder of a Riggleman Information Intelligence Group, but crucially, of course, former congressman. Ed, what have we got coming up?
Okay, coming up, Huawei gets set to break new grounds. Details behind the tech giant's new $1.4 billion R&D hub coming up next. I think we're also taking a quick look at shares of Eventbrite, just a terminal headline. TikTok, Carrie, tell me what's going on.
Yeah, interesting as we were just discussing China, of course. TikTok has a new partnership with Eventbrite. We understand that its users can add Eventbrite links to TikTok videos. We see an absolute surge in the intraday price, up 19%, but a whole lot of regulatory risks still surrounding TikTok here in the United States. This is Bloomberg Technology. Time now for Talking Tech, and first up, Match Group. Well, it's getting a third activist investor. According to a letter reviewed by Bloomberg, Starboard has built a 6.6% stake in the online dating company and plans to make a push for a sale of Match if the company fails to turn around its operations. Now, Match's largest app, which is Tinder, has seen its paying customer base shrink for six straight quarters. Plus, Microsoft faces a UK investigation. Now, the tech giant is set to undergo a full-blown antitrust probe over its investment in Inflection AI, with emphasis over the hiring of former employees in the startup. Now, the Competition and Markets Authority has set a September 11th deadline on whether it will escalate the investigation further. And Huawei nears completion of its chip research center in Shanghai. Now, the new development center will house 30,000 personnel and covers 1.6 million square meters. Huawei is said to have spent over $1.4 billion in investment costs for the new facilities and is expected to use it to pioneer breakthroughs in semiconductors and wireless networks. Ed.
Well, let's stay with that story in Huawei and bring in Bloomberg's Ian King here in San Francisco. Those seem like big numbers, but if there's one thing you've taught our audience in recent years, it's that development of new semiconductors and then the manufacturing of them takes a very long time. So what are the basics in this case with Huawei?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's not like they're beginning from scratch here. This is more, something that we should pay attention to as a symbolic, but also as potential for what happens in the future. If they're bringing in more people, the kind of numbers that they're talking about, that's a significant effort that would be at the same kind of scale of other companies. But it takes years and years, 2 or 3 years to design one, then to get it into manufacturing. Then it's probably not going to be that good. Then you need a second generation. So nothing to be panicking about this year or next year, but certainly a symbol of a serious effort that's underway.
Well, what got us all panicking originally was the Mate 60, and we're anticipating a Mate 70, which of course is their new flagship smartphones, Ian. And when we get our hands on it, how much do we understand of the technology they're using is still US dependent? How much eventually can we cut that off? Will it be cut off?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, and there are a lot of opinions about the chip that's in the current, this is a so-called 7-nanometer chip. Some people are saying this just proves that Huawei has walked around the efforts to stop it. Others are saying, no, this is a kludge job. This really isn't that important. This doesn't mean anything. They won't be able to get any better. So I think you're absolutely right to be pointing out that when that new phone hits market, there'll be a lot of people getting their hands on it, and the first thing they'll do is saw it in half and look at what's inside.
Not exactly the way in which Huawei, I think, wants the phones to be used, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. Bloomberg's Ian King, we so value your opinion and expertise. Thank you. Now, let's look at another key story with software giant Salesforce. Bloomberg exclusively reporting that the company cut 300 jobs this month. Now, it's in an effort to streamline operations and control costs. Bloomberg's Brody Ford broke the news for us, and they'd already been doing a lot of layoffs.
Yeah, the entire tech industry obviously has shed thousands upon thousands of jobs over the last 2-ish years at this point. And there's been this question of, is it over? Are we back to a normal period? And I think what Salesforce and a couple other companies have shown us is that this is just part of the game now, you know? What happened last week, it was just after the end of the second quarter, right? And we saw Salesforce, a few other companies make these cuts. I think going forward, we will see tech companies no longer do this thing where the headcount is just up and to the right indefinitely, rather that they're going to continually kind of cut over here, hire over here, and just monitor those expenses.
Brody, this is 300 roles that you're reporting being cut. I jump into my Bloomberg terminal, DES Go, quickest way to check workforce, and I'm seeing 72,000. But as you point out, it's part of a broader effort, right? What's, I guess, sentiment of Salesforce staff right now? A lot of them watch this program.
Yeah, I would say sentiment is that idea of like, you know, for a long time, large companies, whether it was Salesforce, Intuit, OpenText, whatever, there was more tolerance for, hey, we're going to have divisions that are more speculative bets. They're nice to haves. And I think there's just that ruthless reprioritization going on. I mean, Intuit cut, I want to say it was 1,800 people a week before, and they attributed a lot of it to underperformance. They said, this is not a net headcount reduction. We're just going to rehire people who are going to be doing more relevant work for us. So it's just that sense of, if you are not producing, whether you're a salesperson or some other role where you're able to show you're hitting the P&L, you might be at risk.
Bloomberg's Brody Ford with another piece of excellent reporting. Thank you very much.
So Amazon's two-day summer sale is underway, with real-time data actually suggesting that sales are rising about 13% in the first 6 hours of the event. That's compared to the same period last year. That data coming from Momentum Commerce, which actually manages about 50 brands in a variety of product categories. CEO John T. Shea is with us. And John, you have such a breadth of type of things being sold and being demanded by the consumer. Is it everything?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Everybody should get their figurative wallets open, because there's great deals on Amazon today. At Momentum Commerce, we support brands across all kinds of categories, and that's certainly one trend we're seeing so far in the early innings of Prime Day today, where historically Prime Day's been an event with great participation from consumer electronics, gadget brands, back to school offerings, trying to pull that demand forward. And a lot of Amazon's own devices. This year, we're seeing great offers from jewelry brands, fashion brands, home and kitchen brands. So beauty brands are participating really widely. So it really is the everything store. And with Prime Day today, we're seeing deals across the board.
John, Amazon's jumped around a little bit on the timing of Prime Days. They've experimented at different parts of year. July, is there any sort of seasonality factor that motivates consumers to go out, spend early, catch deals in the summer, rather than, say, later in the year, like in October?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a few years back, Amazon shifted to October for the first time as a function of COVID and disruption from COVID. And then they've held that and sort of done two Prime Days the last few years. What we see in the data certainly is that the summer Prime Day has really been seared into the minds of the U.S. consumer in particular. And we're now seeing the entire retail industry follow suit. So if you wander around the web and go to any D2C site, you're going to see callbacks to Prime Day offerings, even on a direct site. And certainly you see Target and Walmart and others all running similar events timed around Amazon. So this is the 10th Prime Day, and it's certainly become part of culture this year, which is really exciting.
What's different for Amazon now, I think, is the influence and competition from some of the Chinese players. AliExpress, Temu. AliExpress went so big on the Euros, even on Fox Sport here in the United States. But we still have 13% growth in the first 6 hours. What do you see in the market more broadly through this Prime window?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, a non-trivial percentage of goods that are sold on Amazon are from factory brands in China that are coming direct via the Amazon marketplace. And, Amazon has designs to compete more directly with Temu and the likes with a discount section that's going to be added to the site. So there definitely is competition in that area. But none of those players can compete with Amazon on logistics and distribution. I mean, I bought some Legos for my kids this morning on Amazon, and they're going to arrive tomorrow. And that premium convenience is really challenging for AliExpress and Temu to compete with. So it's a different proposition there.
John, you do that in the UK and it arrives the same day, which is also pretty phenomenal. And it's interesting, you're obviously buying for your children. We see more broadly the macro picture of retail sales looking resilient today. Every time I opened TikTok, I got an ad for 16th, 17th Prime Day, and it was Megan Thee Stallion. You talk about it as being a cultural moment. How much are we seeing Gen Z driving the money? How much is it you driving the money? Who is demographically purchasing right now?
Yeah, I think historically it's been across the board, but it hasn't been as strong with Gen Z and younger demos. And I think that's probably certainly part of the reason why Amazon chose Meg Stallion as the spokesperson to promote the event. And I think they did a great job with the lead-in promotions. They also did great. I sadly get an Amazon package at my house every day. And the packing tape for the last month has been really cheeky kind of promotions, getting everybody excited about Prime Day. So the lead-in has been really terrific. And I think we're seeing demographics across the board leverage Amazon because it's so convenient. The selection is so wide. A lot of the brands we work with are beauty brands that are targeting a younger demographic, and they're all participating pretty aggressively in Prime Day this year. One of our clients, First Aid Beauty, has incredible discounts available today. So seeing a lot of different offerings. I think that's the piece that is most interesting this year. The event seems to be on pace. Our data suggests 13% year-over-year growth through 10 a.m. Eastern. Generally, peak shopping for Prime Day is between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern. Right. So it's still really early. But if we hold that track, that's going to be 450 million items sold in 2 days. Yeah. Consumers are going to save about $3 billion. And I think the distribution of those sales is going to be across a lot of different categories, appealing to very different demographics. So it's the everything store and the everything sale, and people are excited.
John Touche, we thank you, CEO of Momentum Commerce. Yeah. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco. A very quick check on the markets. The NASDAQ 100 is basically flat. Some of the laggards in there are the bigger tech companies, Microsoft, Meta, some of the chip makers as well are selling for whatever reason. We continue to talk about the Trump trade because we have the big news item that JD Vance is Trump's VP pick. The two that I pick out are Trump Media and Technology Group, parent of Truth Social. Yes, down almost 10% in the session, but remember it jumped more than 30% yesterday. This is the most direct version of the Trump trade. Many use this stock as a kind of reflection or proxy of how they assess the odds of either presidential candidates' fortunes. And of course, as we talked about earlier, former President Trump used Truth Social to announce JD Vance in the first instance. I also put Tesla, softer, just a few tenths of a percent, but remember it's been buoyant. Again, some saying Tesla Trump trade because Elon Musk came out so quickly, not just in support of President Trump following the assassination attempt of the weekend, but also in support of JD Vance as the VP pick, Karen.
And let's just talk about exactly that, the VP pick. JD Vance, major Silicon Valley investors, the choice of the Ohio senator and former venture capitalist as a running mate seem to be celebrating it. A move that puts the tech industry center stage potentially if Trump wins the White House. We see some members of the Founders Fund currently coming out saying we have a former tech VC in the White House. Joining us is Bloomberg's Mike Shepard. Not the only post that was out there, Mike. Elon Musk, we're just hearing about Tesla's performance today, but Elon Musk himself saying Trump Vance resounds with victory. What do you make of the tie to venture capital?
Well, it really is a reflection, what we're seeing out there now, all the champagne corks popping in so-called little tech, about their sensation that hey, we're being seen. We are finally here. We have arrived, and we will have a seat at the table. And they have, felt for many years that they have taken a back seat to the larger tech companies, to their larger brethren in the form of the major tech companies that we spend so much time talking about, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so forth, and the ones that they feel have taken advantage of them in some ways. And this choice of JD Vance by Trump really sends that signal to the group of investors from Silicon Valley who've also been supporting Trump in increasing numbers too, like David Sachs, who spoke at the convention last night, and others as well.
I want to make one point, which is many venture capitalists, or some venture capitalists, are supporting JD Vance's appointment. Not all. Just would make that point as it was raised to me on social media. Give us a little bit of the backstory. I think we take for granted on Bloomberg Technology, we know quite a lot about JD Vance. We've been covering, for example, Peter Thiel's backing of him for quite some time, but there are many in the audience, Mike, that may be asking, well, we don't get the point here. Who is he and what's he about?
Well, what they may be seeing is, in JD Vance, somebody who is a lot more than just a venture capitalist. He is somebody who's also expressed skepticism about the U.S. support for Ukraine in its efforts to repel the Russian invasion. And people are not just single-issue voters. They're not thinking that, because he is from the venture milieu, I therefore must support him. They're going to look at a lot of other positions that he has taken over the years, including on that, as they make their choices and as they are trying to decide. One interesting thing about Vance is how he has aligned against what he calls a big tech oligarchy. He has even gone so far as to express praise, rare praise for a Biden administration official, of FTC Chair Lina Khan, who has been pursuing competition enforcement cases against a lot of those big tech companies.
We will get into the antitrust position of the point of policy in just a little while. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, who leads the intersection of our coverage of tech and politics. Thank you. So let's continue the conversation on JD Vance and bring in a former colleague of his. Crystal McKellar is a former managing director at a Peter Thiel-backed growth stage fund called Mithril, where she worked with Vance. She's currently a managing partner at Aloft VC. Good morning. Welcome to the studio. So a very similar question to Mike, but give us the detail of your time spent working alongside JD Vance and what you learned about him. And for full disclosure, we got you on the show because you are quoted in that Bloomberg story overnight that we were just discussing with Michael.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I had a fantastic experience with JD. I worked with him for about a year when he was just starting out in Silicon Valley, when he was just starting out as a venture capitalist. And he was fantastic to work with. I mean, everyone knows how intelligent he is. But one thing that really shone through in those early days working with him one-on-one, sitting down with founders, listening to their stories, evaluating deals, was how smart he is and how hardworking he was, and he continues to be. You can't be a polymath and get up to speed on a lot of different industries unless you're both smart and willing to put in the time and put in the work. And I found in him an eager, utterly without ego, smart, hardworking, really fun guy whose values were very centered. And and there's been a lot of talk about how JD is a Silicon Valley candidate.
Yes.
And yes, on the one hand, that's true. He's going to be good for Silicon Valley. He's going to be good for the country because he is pro-growth, he is pro-innovation, and he's also pro-eliminating those regulations that strangle industry, that strangle growth. But that's really only
Chris, one quick point on that our editors were at pains this morning to point out there's a difference between an association with venture capital and the technology industry at large. His position on big tech is very clear, actually. He's in favor of breaking up big tech and increased oversight by the FTC. That might be at odds with the rest of the Republican base. As a venture capitalist, what do you make of that?
As a venture capitalist and as a former antitrust lawyer way back when, I can say unequivocally that predatory behavior on the part of large firms with market power is unequivocally bad for the economy. It's bad, and particularly when those companies control a lot of the speech that we see and control our access to information, it's bad for our democracy. So as a former antitrust lawyer, as a VC, as someone who cares about our democracy and freedom of speech, I unequivocally agree with JD on his skepticism and concern about some of the very large technology companies in our economy.
I'm interested, Crystal, to go back to it. And do you think JD Vance himself will be kind of critical of the way we're all going berserk that there's a VC in the White House?
I'm so sorry. I didn't completely catch
what
that.
Carol was saying. I'll jump in, Carol. What Caroline was saying is that what do you think JD Vance makes of all of the media coverage that he's a venture capitalist or former VC and he's now potentially going to be in an administration?
You know, JD is an extremely humble guy. I remember when his book first came out, he was, gobsmacked by how much attention he got and by how much his words meant to so many people. So I imagine that he is feeling a lot of humility right now, in general, for being, at being chosen for the vice presidential pick by President Trump. And I think that he would feel this, the same way that I'm expressing right now, which is fundamentally, and even on day one when he was in Silicon Valley, his driving force is his concern for the forgotten working class, the people in this nation, at this nation's core, who have suffered because of the hollowing out of traditional industry and the opioid epidemic. That was what animated his desire to write his book, which was extremely raw, extremely vulnerable, and really he sacrificed his own privacy to shine a light on a huge problem facing our nation's core that he wanted to make better. I think that my experience with him when he was working in venture capital was his primary driving force. This was at the core of his identity. So yes, he'll be good for Silicon Valley because he is pro-growth, he's pro-innovation, he's pro-open source, and he is pro the innovation economy. And he's going to be really good for the country because of his genuine compassion for the forgotten middle class, for the forgotten working class.
But Crystal, many feel that venture capital doesn't help the forgotten middle class. Many feel that, in fact, artificial intelligence is going to do a disservice to it yet more. Can you twin for us what seems to be almost at loggerheads, that here's someone who really cares about the hollowing out, who really cares about an opioid crisis, about the forgotten, at the same time as he's backing startup companies that perhaps, take away jobs from blue-collar workers yet further? Do you think he was in any way trying to dovetail those two things together when you worked with him?
Well, I don't see AI replacing steelworkers anytime soon. And, one of the things that venture capital is an enormous category. Everything from social media to national security technology, which is a space that I work in, to healthcare. And I think that, the best technology is the one that moves things forward. It's the one that provides enhanced capabilities for reduced cost. A lot of venture capital dollars are going in directions that I think are destructive for our society. We've certainly seen the destructive force of social media on family structures, on teenagers. So there is a whole category of companies that are invested in by venture capital firms that are extremely destructive to the fabric of American society. And then there is a whole other section of companies that are invested in that truly will, answer our prayers. It will make us as a nation healthier and safer. That is the area where I invest. That is the area where Peter Thiel focuses a lot of his attention. That is where JD was investing. That's where his firm, Colin Greenspan, a former colleague of mine who worked with JD at his fund, that's where his focus is. So I think it's hard to lump all of venture capital together in one bucket.
Well said. And of course, Aloft VC currently saying that you're mission-driven founders and it's all about product solving urgent problems. So Crystal, thank you for the perspective, for bringing us your knowledge of what JD Vance was like to work with. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, coming up, we're going to bring in Cameron Porter, general partner at Steel Atlas, talking of steel workers, but in fact about really the role of energy here, the importance of nuclear power in artificial intelligence development, and, the relevance of energy policy in this US election. This is Bloomberg Technology. So yesterday was the start of the RNC with a theme, Make America Wealthy Again. Now, part of yesterday's discussion, therefore, was around energy. Let's continue the conversation with today's VC Spotlight. Cameron Porter, general partner at Steel Atlas, is with us, joining us to discuss nuclear power. And this has become something that we've really wanted to tackle on the show because more and more people are saying the energy needs of artificial intelligence can only be solved to a large extent by something like nuclear. What type of nuclear power needs to be brought to bear from your investment?
Thank you for having me here, Caroline. And yeah, nuclear is a critical part for the U.S. policy, both because of enterprise technologies like AI, but also because that AI can be used in military applications. So it's really a national security issue. And for looking at nuclear energy broadly, there's really two buckets, fission and fusion. Fusion's a bet on the future. Fission is what's here today. And that's where we're investing. And we're seeing a lot of dollars in the U.S. flow into those new advanced reactor technologies.
Cameron, good morning to you from San Francisco. You know, you position the firm and your investments as kind of industrial technology, something we have discussed on the show. We also look at some of the public equities in the space that have seen, in recent months, 2024, quite incredible gains. Is that evidence enough that this is now a point of consciousness for the presidential candidates in DC, but also your broader investment community?
Yeah, these public gains are just the beginning of the signs that these tailwinds are real and here to stay. I think that we even saw the beginnings of how important public policy in nuclear and energy more broadly is, starting with Trump. Trump began with the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act. Biden has continued to push forward policies, including the ADVANCE Act that was just passed, in order to make it easier for us to license new reactors, in order to make it easier for us to finance those reactors. And the private markets, both at the late stage and the early stage, are now taking note of that and investing in companies that can start delivering on this demand.
Former President Trump was on the All In podcast recently saying, I'm okay with nuclear, but you have to do where it makes sense. So talk about where you see nuclear making sense, what investments you made that make sense. I know that you're looking a lot at Transmutix in particular. How are they doing things differently? Where are they based? What are they solving?
Look, we backed Transmutix because there were three major problems with nuclear in the past. Safety, how do we prevent things like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island? Waste, how do we make sure that we're not spending billions of dollars? I mean, in the US, we literally were about to spend at Yucca Mountain $100 billion to deal with the waste problem. And then how do we deal with proliferation? How do we make sure the nuclear systems we are developing here in the US can be deployed globally without risking people developing nuclear weapons? And so the reason we invested in Transmutix is their use of a particle accelerator allows them to develop a reactor that solves those three core issues, ushering in what we think is the future of nuclear energy.
During that episode of All In, I think what Trump was discussing with its hosts was a comparison with Europe, right? I think France was the specific example, but the UK, where Caroline and I hail from, has some active nuclear reactors. This is something the United States is not just dealing with in 2024. Talk to us about the timeline of what it would take to bring nuclear back in a meaningful way, to your mind.
Look, this is a decade-long investment period. It's going to take several years for these systems to get licensed and then probably 5 years in an optimistic case for them to get built. Those are the timelines that we're seeing in China, which right now has the most reactors under construction. And it's a worthwhile investment. I mean, I think we can look at the case study of France versus Germany. Germany went all in on wind and solar. When Russia pulled the plug on natural gas, all of a sudden their grid was thrown into a state of shock and volatility that's undermined their manufacturing industry to today. Whereas France, because of their reliance on nuclear, which is reliable, self-sovereign, they've been able to maintain relatively stable energy prices. And so that's what the U.S. should index on going forward.
And do you think it will? And ultimately, how quickly do you think policy will change?
I think policy is already changing. We saw under Biden the commitment at COP28 to 3x nuclear here in the U.S. And that's a commitment now that we're seeing backed up by policy like the ADVANCE Act, which I think it's worth noting it was an incredibly bipartisan bill. And that's going to continue under Trump or Biden. If it's Trump, I expect to see more deregulation to get reactors to market sooner. And if it's Biden, we're going to see incentives in order to help promote the investment in these companies.
Cameron Porter, General Partner at Steel Atlas, on a very important nuclear discussion. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Rasan Kincaid-Smith, COO of Frankfurt-based Northern Data Group, a specialist tech company providing high-performance computing solutions. The company also expecting to see revenue triple as demand for AI continues to grow. An incredible backstory, Rasan, where in simple terms, you go from being largely focused on crypto and mining and through acquisitions, high-performance data center in the AI context. It seems to be that part that's going to be the driver of this revenue tripling. Explain that long-term forecast, please.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of contextualize, the Northern Data Group is, as you say, a high-performance computing solutions provider. We have an established position in the HPC market as a result of our legacy in cryptocurrency mining. But HPC is now front and center, or the picks and shovels, if you will, of the boom in generative AI. And we're witnessing a real global race to meet the soaring demand for generative AI and its massive computing requirements. Companies are really scrambling to secure access to the latest GPUs, which will be housed inside of data centers. And there's a real short supply of data centers too. So unlike many others, we are really hyper-focused on investing not just in the most cutting-edge hardware and software technologies, but also in the most sustainable data center environments. Our environments are more broadly powered by 100% carbon-free energy, and we really like to keep that carbon footprint at the most minimal point. The other ethos is really, really important to us.
Rosanna, we just showed the shares. I point out they're probably higher in the session after 214 million euros worth of share issuance earlier. I think I'm right in saying this is the first time you've spoken publicly since former employees of the company filed suit and made allegations against the management team of fraud. Summarizing, they say that you falsely misrepresented some of the financials of the company. We just wanted to give you the opportunity to comment publicly on Bloomberg Technology about that suit.
Yes. So I think anybody with even a cursory understanding of our business will know that those complaints are completely without merit. We have already filed a motion to dismiss, and we're confident that the legal process will vindicate the company. We're publicly traded. All of our financials are publicly available, along with our stable cash and financial position. So while this is somewhat of a nuisance, what we are really laser focused on now is executing against our strategic plan, and the ultimate credibility of our business and the innovation that we drive is built on that delivery. So we're not worried about it at all.
You're not worried. Are you so therefore not worried that you might look at doing another listing here in the United States? There's been a sort of a theme of companies that were big in crypto and crypto mining pivoting and becoming a key resource in the world of AI. I think a CoreWeave here in the US. Would you tap investors here?
So just as a sort of starting point, of course, I can't comment on market speculation, but as I said, our business is really performing well and the AI sector is thriving. But of course, we want to operate in the spaces that are most open to the advancement of generative AI and the business that we are driving. But also, just as a point of clarity, of course, we are not pivoting from one thing to the other. We have used our ground root in HPC solutions to develop new lessons and take the learnings from those lessons to provide new use cases like generative AI and machine learning.
How important is the US part of the business versus German and versus European? How does it differ, very briefly, Rosanne?
So the European environment is our heart. So we are a European-based company with a European heart, but we are a global business with a global footprint. And so we use the investment, and you will have seen, as you've mentioned, our capital raise, that will be used to expand our footprint into the US. So however, though, the part of the business in Europe is truly important to us because it provides some of our true USPs. We are data sovereign. We have access to large amounts of electricity. So these are true USPs for us in the go forward.
Rosanne Kincaid-Smith, great to have some time with you, COO of Northern Data. We appreciate it. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Ed?
Incredible amount to recap, a lot of Bloomberg reporting, so check it out on our podcast. You know where to find it. This is Bloomberg Technology.